Hey, this is Helen Dawson, and you're listening to the Innovation Crowd podcast. Businesses are looking to reinvent themselves, be more digital, more sustainable, and thrive in a volatile world. Yet most corporate innovation programs don't deliver. In fact, many don't even survive after their second birthday. On this show, I sit down with the experts to discuss the strategies that work, so you don't have to learn the hard way. So come and join me in the Innovation Crowd. Welcome back to the Innovation Crowd. I'm very excited to have my guest today and former client, David Ayeni, who's now the Director of Construction Product Strategy at Bentley Systems. So David, why don't you tell us a little bit about your new role and what Bentley Systems does?
Hi, Helen. Thanks for inviting me to this podcast. Really excited to have this discussion with you. So my new role, as you mentioned, is the Director of Construction Product Strategy at Bentley Systems, which is a bit of a mouthful, but I'll go into a little bit as we go through this discussion. Bentley Systems, of course, for those who may not know, is a software company, an engineering software company that has a famous tagline, advancing infrastructure. But what does that really mean? Really means software and solutions built for engineers by engineers problems. So we think about infrastructure, whether it's road, rail, industrial buildings, etc. If you're going to engineer solutions to mimic the way those types of infrastructure work, you need to understand how to engineer them, design them, and then deliver software, which is very malleable to represent how to design and solve the problems around the software, and then build the software so that the infrastructure can be designed, built, and then handed over to an asset owner. So Bentley Systems has really been doing that for 40 years now. This year is their 40th anniversary. And it's such a good time to be in the industry because there's so much going on. And I'm excited to talk about that and a lot more with you on this podcast.
Brilliant. So you started out like me as an engineer. What was your route into technology?
My route into technology was pretty, non-conventional, really. So in engineering, you try and solve problems, you try and look at what the problem statement is, figure out what's the best way to tackle this problem to get an outcome that then can be repeatable, right? Because problems aren't different when you're trying to, for example, design a facility or design a road or design any type of infrastructure, which I previously described. And I always wanted to figure out a way to get to a point where my work could be easier. So I looked into automation. I used to do lots of calculations, starting with pump calcs. For those who know what pumps are, and there's lots of pumps in any type of facility, whether it's a house, whether it's an airport, whatever the type of building is, you always have some sort of pumping going on. So I was designing a refinery when I first started in the first couple of years, and there's so many pumps in the different, even through the units within a refinery. So I thought, how can I get to a point where we have standard calculation sheets where I can automate a lot of what I do because it's very repeatable. So I started writing extra macros into Excel sheets, and then started figuring out how to get those simulations where we did engineering calculations, the whole facility with the pump calcs to make my job easier. And the more I started to do that, the more I realized, man, my life could be a lot more easy if I stayed closer to the IT guys, to the guys in the automation team, and the girls there doing great work, to see if my life could be a lot easier. I tried to work smarter. That was over 18 years ago. And today I still look for ways to solve hard problems by trying to abstract that into automated solutions. So that's really how I got into it. And solving problems in an easier way, it became more addictive because my productivity just became better and better. And I got more opportunities to prove myself in solving other problems that had a high impact to the organizations that I worked for. And then the rest is history. right?
And it's so smart because when people say, oh, where should I start with digital? To me, I always say automation, because there's a really immediate payback of the benefit, right? And it really affects the person doing the task in a positive way. So that's still true 18 years on.
Still true. Still very true. Exactly.
And that kind of brings me to a lot of the technologies around in infrastructure, like digital twin, people have been talking about for a really, really long time. And why do you think it's been so hard to make progress with something like a digital twin?
You're hitting on a very difficult question. And when I think about, 18 years doing automated solutions, but been in the industry for over 20, you speak with seasoned engineers, seasoned professionals, and you hear those two words back to back in that phrase, and there's a visceral reaction, right? Digital twin. Just like the reaction when people had sort of 5 years, 10 years before digital twin came along, which was digital transformation. It's very non-tangible to professional engineers, right? A digital twin. I mean, give me more detail. What do you mean by digital twin? And because it felt like hype at the time when the phrase came out, you had a lot of non-believers or people that were like, okay, another fad around this whole digital thing. People already started having digital fatigue around the time of digital transformation. So you bring in this new phrase, digital twin, and it's like, okay, so now what do these solution providers mean? These vendors, digital twin, right? So it was kind of an intersection there where you're trying to bring along the seasoned professionals in our industry while necessary, because that tacit knowledge they have, as you and I know today, a digital twin, depending on whether it's role-based or persona-based, can really help solve massive problems. But if you don't carry people along with what does it mean, how can it help them in their day job? How can a leader in an organization use this technology to deliver more productivity? They're just throwing that phrase around, I think started off the wrong way. But now with a lot of people now understanding, and we'll get into the definitions, right, of digital twin and how that in context can help solve problems, it's gotten better. But I still have people today that when you say digital twin, they roll their eyes a little bit like, oh, what do you mean? Because a lot of the things the digital twin solutions are trying to solve, the problems they're trying to solve, have been solved for the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's just a different packaging on the way we were doing things in the past. I hope that kind of starts to answer some of the questions you were asking.
So yeah, let's get tangible then. Over the next 5 years, where do you see the technology playing out? What trends do you see? What do you want to see in your role from a construction technology point of view?
So let me, as an engineer afflicted by logic, let me first define to the audience what a digital twin could mean in context of our discussion, right? So in its simplest form, it's a virtual representation of a physical asset, process, or entity that is synchronized with real-time updates for the benefit of whoever it is that needs that digital twin outcome. What do I mean by that? So in an engineering digital twin, it could be an engineer is working on a job and they're getting real-time updates on the model, the information model they're working on, with updates from different disciplines, because you have work in progress, you have concurrent engineering. So the digital twin of a mechanical engineer's pump design could be the layout drawing updates, could be the net positive suction head from process engineering, the real-time update of that in context pump design for that mechanical engineer. Could be an engineering digital twin of that pump, just to give a definition for your audience. Now, for me, when I think about how digital twins can help to answer your question, I think it's really about trying to figure out where can we get the most impact of what I just described in context within a larger user base, so that people can really see the value and the benefit of, okay, this thing is working. And socially, people are now seeing, okay, Helen and David are benefiting from this digital twin outcome. Let's see what it's about, because they purported that they've got this percentage productivity. How can I buy into that? How can I get some more of that? So my job and the industry, my job, first of all, is to try and get to a better way of communicating what a digital twin could look like in construction. How can it help solve problems for my customers and for the construction industry at large, which is a big problem to solve, and I'm sure we get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Then how can we develop, from a Bentley standpoint, the software to improve the user experience of this digital twin outcome, right? Because if the user experience isn't easy enough, adoption won't be as high, and then we won't get to the promise of the digital twin outcomes. Because Helen, you know this, but let me just throw some information out there for your audience. Construction, as of the last time I checked, was behind, I guess, farming when it came to digital transformation, and the same would probably apply to digital twin. So improving the experience of users using adopting technology in construction tech would make big difference in productivity, but also start to bring us from that laggard status that construction typically had into a more emerging sort of bleeding edge sector, which I think we need to be involved in the discussions about how can we get more into the way manufacturing is seen, right? Because construction is really ubiquitous everywhere. So I hope I've touched on some of the answers that you were looking for there.
And, there's trillions of dollars of investment going into infrastructure right now. So, just tiny percentage increases in productivity are massive, aren't they, in terms of potential impact?
They are. One of the things that I've seen, for example, is, as you mentioned, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And let's go back to improving processes, automation, and trying to figure out how to get, that outcome of improved productivity. Let me give you an example. So people talk about construction and it's been laggard, but I think the challenge has been when you design or engineer something and then you want to see how that would look like. So again, I'm still describing kind of like a digital twin outcome. You run simulations and you see, how do we want this facility or this asset to operate in the future? So engineering design and operation simulation are one-to-one. And you have this operator training simulators, in old school oil and gas facilities, where you start to train the operators way before the facility comes online, right? So that's typically a one-to-one systems-based design, systems-based operations. But right in the middle is construction. Construction isn't systems-based, it's area-based. You don't construct by area. Because as I said, you can't 3D print a whole facility or infrastructure in general. I mean, think about the energy consumption and just the fact that technology isn't ready and isn't going to be maybe in my lifetime to do that. So with that multi-trillion-dollar opportunity in infrastructure to develop construction, think about that. You need to figure out how something is designed so you can construct it so that it can be operated through the nameplate, through its life, because an asset will operate for 50, 60, 70 years. So when you construct it, you have to think about whole life cycle. And that's really part of the challenge in this multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. But how do we make it better and smarter the way we deliver from a Bentley standpoint and from my role standpoint? How do I make it easier to make that multi-trillion-dollar opportunity tangible for not just Bentley, but for constructors out there and users of technology to improve the way they construct? It's really an interesting challenge.
It's quite a complex supply chain, isn't it? Construction. So how do the kind of principal contractors and the owner operators need to collaborate together in order to achieve a sort of better digital outcome?
Wow. Okay, so we're going deep now. It's been a challenge contractually, right? So typically, let's talk the last 20 years. The question is, how do we get the supply chain and owner operators to work better together to get the outcome? Contractually has been a challenge because unlike with agile and, it's all about outcomes versus contracts and holding people to account when it comes to paperwork. In construction, typically the risk is on the tier one and the supply chain in most contract forms. So I think the better way going forward is to figure out, okay, if we're going to be developing better outcomes and using more digital techniques, how do we change the contractual mechanisms and the way we've had contracts set up in the past, where it's been, lowballing from a supply chain standpoint. I'm going to deliver this, this construction to you for your asset, and this is the cost. To actually, there are requirements that the asset owner will flow down to say, this is what the outcome we want. These are the requirements we need to be fulfilled. And then through milestones, gates, as you go through that process of a project delivery, which construction is part of, you start to have a collaborative approach to, okay, this is in the contract. These are the information drops through the milestones that this asset needs to be constructed, and really get everyone on the same page about what does that mean. Because back in the day, people would say RTC, read the contract, or some constructors would say RTFC, read the contract, right? To make sure that we know what we're liable for. Now, one company who've done this really well, and I know them really well because I've worked with some of the brightest minds in that organization, the leading companies, the Dow Chemical Company, and they adopted a process called advanced work packaging, which is really thinking about the end in mind of the asset that's going to be operated. And how do we bring the operators and the construction team together right at the beginning to say, this is what our path of construction is going to look like. This is what the requirements from the owner, which they are the owner, but they've got construction management teams. And how do we bring the supply chain on the journey with us right from the beginning, so they understand, what does this mean when I say, think about the end right at the beginning? What do I mean by advanced work packaging? What do I mean by just-in-time delivery? What do I mean by required on-site dates? What do I mean by installation work package? What do I mean by construction work package? What do I mean when I say we need to keep the path of construction viable? First of all, it's getting everyone around the culture change on not just the contract, but how then do we enforce that contract in a collaborative environment so that we can deliver better, where one side doesn't feel that they've got to, look at the contract for ways that they can get an advantage, whereby it's more collaborative. And that multi-trillion-dollar opportunity means if you find delivery partners in the supply chain as an asset owner for your construction, you will continue to go back to that delivery partner, because they know how you expect it to be done, and they're doing it in a way that they respect the contract, it's delivered against the contract, but at the same time, they're getting smarter as they partner with you through the evolution of that. So that's just one example that I can think of, real life, where there's a really super smart asset owner that's done that, is doing that the industry can learn from. And there are others out there. I just wanted to give you an example to make it real, right?
And that definitely chimes with what I've been hearing. So I heard a principal contractor say, we need to demonstrate that we're delivering benefit out of digital when we tender for work, because the asset owners are expecting digital to drive benefits. So it's interesting the way it should be flowing down the supply chain. We talk about collaboration a lot on this podcast, and I guess the sense is that you can't have that win-lose mentality. It has to be all boats need to rise, everyone needs to win in order to actually make progress, which for construction is just so alien to that RTC attitude,
It is.
isn't it?
I think you're teaming up for something that I thought about when I was growing up in the industry, where the smart construction companies would always understand, when is a change, when is a claim event, when is there a trend. And that's all good, because that's all part of best practice when it comes to project management and project controls, right? And I think the mindset has to be, how can we not get to a point where we're delayed and then we're thinking about how can we do more value engineering to save time, to save costs? Whereas right from the beginning, it can be more collaborative. We can bring people together. When we're looking at the logic sequences in our project plan, where can we find areas of quick wins, but better wins, so that people can see the benefit right up front of using innovative ways, of digital to solve these problems. I mean, I'll give you another example. So I'm an unashamed alumni of Bechtel. And when I worked at Bechtel, anything that was done around construction technology or construction process or construction techniques that was badged as innovation had to be something that really drove value on the job on the job site and the job front. You weren't just innovating with digital for the sake of it, because guess what? As a mainstay in the ENR, Engineering News Records, top 20 companies, it's been in the top 2 Bechtel for over 20 years, right? Why have they been there? Because really straddling the line between innovation, which is doing something differently using digital tools, right? But the outcome always has to be something that is delivering benefit and productivity where it matters, where the rubber hits the road on the construction job site. So collaboration is absolutely key when you think about, okay, I want to improve productivity. So how do I do that? Well, you have to speak to the guys and girls that are out there figuring out how can you make their lives easier, because they're the ones working also with the supply chain as well, because, you know, they have to deliver packages of work and they have to work with other tier twos, other people. So really, using digital for the sake of it isn't the answer. What we're saying here, we're saying using digital, like you said, collaborate to deliver better outcomes. And yes, sometimes it's not going to be driven by bottom up, but bottom up has a main stake in when you drive stuff top down, bottom up also has to meet with that to help, you know, change the culture around what does collaboration really mean on a job site during execution, right?
Yeah, and I think the important thing about bottom up is that you need to be providing a benefit for sort of everybody, not just the executive, but also the person on the job site, because otherwise they'll do the more productive thing, which is not use your technology. Because actually people on the front line are very time poor and they're really good at finding better ways of doing stuff with the tools that they have available. And if the answer is don't use the digital thing, that's a really important signal to receive, isn't it, from the
You nailed it.
organization?
You nailed it. I mean, having been in this space for a while, like you alluded to, you provide tools for people to use. If those tools aren't going to provide the benefit that was on the label, on the tin, as we say in the UK, then they're going to figure out a way to solve that problem that they're trying to solve using that tool in a different way. Might go back to old habits, might find something better. So as I mentioned right at the start of this discussion, my job in my role is to help improve the user experience of using our technology so they can solve the problems in a repeatable way and they feel comfortable that we also listening to their needs, right? Because like you said, it's people will vote how they solve their problems just because this is where rubber really hits the road in construction for sure. Agree with you.
Talk to me about data and the role of data.
Data. I'm going to talk to you about data and the role of data in the context of our discussion because it's really, really important, right? Data is generated on every project, every capital project, every, let's call it construction project, right away from when, you know, the feasibility studies are being done through planning, design, engineering. And all of that is to deliver that asset, to construct that asset. And things are always, as you know, happening, concurrent engineering is happening. And the construction guys and girls want to have a line of sight of that, you know, the long lead items, you know, the big, you know, exotic materials that need to be ordered, that long lead have to come first. So you really have to get the right information from the calculation, that data, turn it into information as quickly as possible so you can support that path of construction. But the challenge is if the data quality isn't good enough, or you don't tag the data as work in progress, or you don't have the right processes or the right tooling or the right solutions to enable you to leverage the data that you're creating, turning it into information so people can understand how to use it, then the data is just being created for the sake of it, or it's not being leveraged. Like I said, a lot of data is created on projects, not just from the engineering teams I've mentioned, but also in construction, right? When you start thinking about construction now have information managers that deal with construction information. And what they're trying to do is make sense of the data. If it isn't done properly by other different disciplines, they try and make sense of it in the context of their world. When we talk about, you know, a digital twin for construction, a construction information manager will say, okay, how do I understand what work needs to be done 3 months from now? When is something required on site? How do I make sense of this data? How do I turn it into information to be proactive? So imagine a world where you're able to curate and validate that data ahead of as it's being created, in the right context with rules of, let's call them rules of credit. So when it gets into the hands of a construction professional, they know the validity and how mature that data is, so they can make better decisions about, okay, this is just going to be used for rough construction planning. Oh, this is now ready for use. It's been issued and it's now in a place where it's now shared for general use. I don't want to use the ISO 19650 terminology. I want to use simple language. So data is really important, because just because you have so much of it doesn't mean all of it is valuable. And how to turn that data into information is only as good as the tools you have available. Because guess what? When something becomes real data, as opposed to being in, locked in silos, then you need to have solutions, especially on these large construction projects. You need to have solutions that can process that data, turn into information so decisions can be made. So when I talk about data, really data is key to success on project delivery and construction. But how to use that data, educating people about how to process it, when to issue it for use, when to declare that the data is correct, how to manage, again, educate the supply chain to not check their own homework, but to understand that these are the information requirements. So if it isn't at the right quality, don't send it over. Otherwise, you're going to slow the progress of the project down and construction, therefore. So data is really big. And I've seen so many stats that says that at least 80% of the data that's used in project delivery is just garbage. That's unfathomable for me. That's unfathomable. It seems like just a throwaway statistic, but imagine if that were true and you didn't have the guys and girls who had the skills to be able to translate that data. So data is big, to answer your question initially, in construction.
Someone said to me that out of every hour looking for analysing data, 49 minutes is just looking for it and aligning it and governing it. And only 11 minutes is actually generating some insights, which is just staggering from a productivity perspective, isn't it?
It is. I have some more stats in this area that I can throw at you. So imagine that's a stat. I'm not sure what region they're talking about, but I have region in the North America region, which is, if you want to call it mature, similar to we have in Europe, mature construction. So imagine, again, on a 10-hour day, only 3.7 hours of that day is actually used in real productive construction work, right? The rest of the time, the remaining 6.3 hours is used to find data, find information, find resources, go from the job site to the trailer or to other locations to secure that data or that information to do the work. So actually, you think about a 37% on average productivity of a construction professional, it's down to inavailability of the right data at the right time in the hands of the right person. So I can buy that statistic that you just shared, because I think it's depending on how mature the constructor is or in what part of the world you are, those numbers will vary. But the stat you just threw out there is not alien to me. I can definitely buy into that, Helen.
And I guess the backdrop is it's an industry that has a sort of aging workforce, struggling to attract new people to the profession. These skilled construction professionals are in short supply.
They are. And if you think about the skilled construction professionals with that tacit knowledge, some of the time, that these organizations they work for haven't tapped into, and they're retiring. And then we talked about all that big data that's going to be available on the project. The next step will then be, if you can't find a way to harness that tacit knowledge and you have all this data and all these construction projects, how do you do that? The next thing, we talked about digital transformation, we talked about digital twins, is now AI. People are thinking about, how do I use artificial intelligence to improve my productivity, to make sure the schedule is optimized, to make sure I can make better decisions. But as you and I both know, AI is only going to increase the rate at which your bad data is proliferated across your project. So the main thing for me is all about understanding your work processes, understanding how you can use that data, get data quality right, harness the knowledge that's in your organization in construction, so that you can, when you get to the point where you're using artificial intelligence, or machine learning techniques, you're getting a better outcomes. Robotics is also, everyone talks in construction about robotics helping. We're not quite there in construction like manufacturing now, but even to get to that point, you need enough data to be able to allow the robots to know what jobs they have to do when and at what location. You know what I mean? It's very interesting.
I like that you've talked about AI, because that was going to be my next question. And so if I play back what you've said, getting aligned data is the most important thing for...
I would say so. I would say getting aligned data, making sure that the data represents the context in which the project wants to proceed with, or making sure that at least the people who are going to make the decisions have the decisions from a well curated source. And if AI is going to help to improve the speed at which the data is processed, curated, and given into the hands of the guys and girls who are going to make the decisions, and that's always going to be a good thing. That's always going to be a good thing. But all comes back to data quality for me.
So no one should be sitting there choosing between doing a data project or an AI project or a digital twin project. They should be saying, if we do the data, we're then going to unlock digital twin, we're going to unlock AI, we're going to unlock scalable use cases.
I agree. Exactly. I think the foundations need to be really good. You need to lay the road really well before you can drive the Ferrari, because if the track isn't laid really smooth, you might as well be driving just a normal car, not a high performance one. So absolutely correct. You get the benefits of making sure you do the right things, take the right steps, make sure the data is of the right quality, validated, curated, given to the right people at the right time in their hands. And I think you just get the benefits of doing the right things because you have the right processes in place, which goes back, I guess, to you and my background in engineering. In the end, we talk about automation, if you want to get, for me, better outcomes, you need to make it super, like if you want a mass of people to do things in the right way, you need to have the right processes so that multiple people can do those things, those critical tasks and activities in a similar way when they get to a decision point. And if you can automate the most critical parts of that, so that then only the tacit things or things that are super complex that you need to think about are then done in these areas of excellence presented to you with machines or with better data, digital twin outcomes. That's better than having everyone trying to figure out those problems where you don't have automated processes. I mean, it all comes back to basic principles in the end. For me, work on the processes, get the workflows correct, make sure the data is aligned to that, and then the people will do, because no one comes to work trying to do a bad job, right? No. But as leaders in organizations, we need to make sure that we're setting our people up for success. And I really say that when I speak to, senior most people in organizations, because that is really what keeps them awake at night. They're delivering really complex assets to owners, and the last thing they want is a failure of some sort because something wasn't done with the highest level of quality or safety. And it all goes back to processes and how data is interpreted, assimilated, and used. So, yeah.
And I love your analogy. You need to lay the road right to drive your Ferrari. I think that's just brilliant. So let me ask you the question that I ask everybody that comes on the podcast, which is, what's one lesson you learned the hard way that you wish someone had just tapped you on the shoulder and told you earlier?
That's a good one. Wow. Okay. So there's two coming into my mind right now, but I think I'll just go for the non-controversial one, right? One, I'll start with one and see how we go with that one. I wish, as I was growing in the industry, someone had taken the time to tell me right at the beginning that it's not always about logic. And I know that defies everything we've discussed before. When dealing with people, I've had a good career so far, and I hope there's many more years of of moving in the right direction of my career. But I've always been very logical. And I wish right at the beginning of my career, someone took me aside and said, sometimes you can't be logical, especially when you're dealing with people and you're getting into leadership positions. Sometimes you have to be inefficient to carry people along. You have to be inefficient sometimes to be effective. Sometimes logic doesn't always win. And that's conventional logic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do I mean? Fortunately, I've had the opportunity to sit on board meetings, some very large companies. And the first time I heard this phrase for the first time after 15 years in my career, you asked the question, what do I wish I'd known? I wish I'd heard this sooner, where a chairman of the board was challenged by one of the non-exec directors by saying he was being too logical, right? And I didn't understand what was being, I was just thinking, surely that's a compliment of being too logical. But it was in context of, we need to go through, and for confidentiality reasons, I can't explain exactly what was going on, but we need to do these things to get to this outcome. And I don't understand why the people just don't get it. It was kind of the context of what the chairman of the board was saying, because he was also the CEO of quite a large company. And the rebuttal from this non-exec, she was deadpan. She said, "You're just being logical," and it was just the way it was expressed. For me, I didn't get it. So after the meeting, I asked one of the other members, who now is a mentor of mine, what did she mean by that? And he basically broke it down to me as I'm saying to you, when it comes to people, sometimes being efficient and logical isn't effective, because a lot of the things that are spoken about in the boardroom is about people and how, because they're the biggest part of a company. So I wish I'd learned that lesson sooner, because I've been in managing people now for such a long time that if I had known some of these things and the way to navigate some of the discussions that I've just described to you, it would have been better. So that's one that really sticks to the back of my mind. I guess you said I could have two. The second one is, I've learned this the hard way, and in my previous role, is don't expect as a given right recognition, right? We come to work every day, as I mentioned to you. No one comes to work, at least I don't believe people come to work to do a bad job. But as you're doing your job, we're only human, and we know that humans, you do want recognition. When you do a good job, you want it. But I'd wish I had been told that recognition, don't then turn it into a case whereby you're feeling entitled, even though you feel you're doing an excellent job, whether it's solving high impact problems, whether it's providing insights, whether it's going above and beyond. Just do the best you can do every day, leave it all out there, and within yourself, know that you're doing a good job. I wish that earlier on, and that this wasn't taught to me. I learned the hard way, right? Wish I'd really been coached around that continue working. Yes, everyone wants recognition, but actually being fulfilled is all about getting to a place where within yourself you're doing the best, and even though life isn't fair, right, you're just making those choices that you can based on what's in front of you, and you're just doing things without hoping or wanting recognition. That's something I've learned the hard way. So there's a second one for you.
They're both good. And the first one, I remember being a young engineer too and thinking logic was all that mattered. And that was a painful learning for me too. So I completely see. I think we're sort of taught as engineers that there's a right answer. And of course, when it comes to people, there isn't. There's just an individual answer. So yeah, very good. Thank you so much, David. As always, a great chat.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Innovation Crowd. Subscribe on your favourite podcasting service so you don't miss a thing. And I'll see you next time.